and welcome back to the Nourisher Podcast. Before we dive in, I want to take a quick moment to thank the incredible sponsors who helped us celebrate the 1-year anniversary party. Cactus Cove Inn and Suites, Little Blue Truck Party Company, Sips and Giggles, Wingstop, 3 of a Kind Photography, and then, of course, I cannot forget our pop-up vendors, Simply Adorable Jewelry and Gifts, Bomb Fusion, Permanent Jewelry, Chica Fresa with some delicious baked goods, and What Incarnations with her beautiful flower bar. So thank you guys again for believing in me, believing in this community. It just is going to allow us to continue to grow the podcast and continue to create space for honest and meaningful conversations. So with that, let's talk about today's conversation. I'm sitting down with Kimberly Griggs, owner of Ignite Consulting and Coaching, for a conversation that is raw, thoughtful, and deeply human. Kimberly shares her story of profound loss, navigating grief as a young single mother, and how that season completely reshaped the trajectory of her life and now her work. This is a longer episode, but one worth completely settling into. So wherever you are, take your breath, get comfortable, and let's get into it. Hi, Kimberly. Thank you so much for joining us on the Nourisher Podcast.
Thanks, Kayla. I'm very excited to be here.
I first met you through Junior League, I believe, but I think we have a few connections. And so this is the first time you and I are getting to actually sit down and have a more intimate conversation. So I'm just very appreciative that you were willing to come on and share your story with me and the rest of the listeners. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I really love the podcast and I love what you're doing. And I think it's important to have these types of conversations in the collective, but also on a one-to-one basis. I know that's something that I really try to talk to our kids about. Like, you got to get in front of people.
Well, before we dive into your story, can you tell us a little bit about who you are today and what your life looks like?
That's a big question. And thank goodness we get a lifetime to answer that, not just a few minutes. I think who I am today is a woman that has built a lot of resilience in her life that she didn't know she had before. I think I've overcome a lot of challenges from mental perspective, in that growing up, I had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of wishing that I was in somebody else's shoes or somebody else's situation instead of seeing what was possible for myself. So I think today I stand, here as a woman who has learned a lot and has grown a lot through the challenges that I have been given. And now I'm here to show up and serve a lot. Really, that's in the last half of my life. That's what I pray and hope to do.
And I know most everyone in this area knows you as a consultant and a coach. And so I think whenever we look at you, we see someone who's so well put together and has built this wonderful business and now is giving all of this advice to other people. But I think it's true for all of us that people see us in such a way that they have no idea what we've been through, what we're going through currently. And so I'm curious, when people meet you now, what is something that they don't often realize that you've actually walked through? And I know we'll kind of get into the details of that, but just as a general statement, something that they don't know about you.
I think that's such a great question. And actually, you kind of hit on a few things that I think people think about me. And this is something I definitely didn't know about myself. I think there are 2 camps of what people might think about me. I think there is one camp that maybe does see me as put together and self-confident. I think another camp maybe sees me as being too shy to the point of I'm either like stuck up or just terribly awkward. Both are true and both are untrue at the same time. Maybe not the stuck up part, but the awkward. What I know about myself today is that I'm an ambivert. And I didn't even know that word existed until I started really studying personal development. But what an ambivert is someone who takes away energy from both by being with people, but also by being alone and by yourself. I couldn't figure out why in some circumstances I was, more outgoing. I would say I've never been like rah-rah and like some of the mutual people that we know in common. I've never been like that. But I've also I'm not, terribly shy, like to the point that I can't have a conversation. But in certain environments, I would find myself being one or the other. And it took me a long time to really figure that out. I don't think I have let people see the real me a lot for a lot of various reasons, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, I can definitely relate because I think sometimes I hear people say, you're so confident speaking in front of people. And I'm like, just so you know, on the inside, I am SpongeBob running around in the burning room. And that's exactly how I feel.
Well said. Good analogy.
What made you feel ready to share this part of your story on the Nourisher today?
Well, one, what I do know about you is that you're very empathetic and you're very growth minded. And I really like that. And when I see it in someone, it brings something out of me that regardless of fear or regardless of being hesitant or making yourself feel vulnerable, I want to serve people that show up like that. So I want to acknowledge you first for making it easy to share. But as far as being ready to share, I have been doing a lot of self-reflecting because I'm actually writing this story in a book. It's been a very painful process, but one that's very therapeutic, I guess, if you will. So that's what makes me ready. And again, I think just kind of looking at where I am in the season of my life, my last child is graduating from high school this year. And so I find myself kind of at the verge of another transition in life. So it's kind of funny going back to my first big one and sitting here and just knowing that now there really is an inner confidence that I know what this looks like. I've seen it before and I know how to get unstuck. And I just want to help others be able to navigate change in any little way I can to give back what was given to me.
Absolutely. I think it's so important when we do feel that spark to share our story, because I think that's an indicator that someone needs to hear it, almost like a sign.
Yeah. I heard someone say you are best positioned to serve the person that you used to be. And that really stuck with me. I think Ed Milet is the one that said that. And if there is one thing that I could say to someone who has gone through something similar to my story, or anyone that is really just on the verge of a big transition in their life, I felt very alone. So if I can, be a voice that just someone feels a little less alone, mostly my kids, which is who I'm writing this for primarily, that's what I want to leave behind as far as a legacy.
Yeah. We'll get into your story. And before we dive into the details and how your healing journey has developed, can you just give us a baseline of your experience and then we'll go from there?
Yeah, the baseline, to give you a little bit of background to where that started, mindset-wise. I'm West Texas girl my whole life. I grew up in Lubbock, very nuclear family. Mom stayed at home, dad went to work. I absolutely loved and adored both my parents, but my dad was just this shiny light to me, that I just idolized. And forgive me, I probably will get teary because he is no longer with us, and that is a part of this story, but I craved spending time with him. The unfortunate part is that I was really raised by a single mom because my dad traveled a lot, so he just wasn't home. Both of my parents were wonderfully different and gave me very different perspectives of the person that I could be. My mom was very, I would say, kind of like by the book, follow the rules, stay safe, keep it in check. We were her whole life, and she wanted my sister and I to just be protected. My dad was more the type of parent that give you a little bit of, line to hang yourself, enough rope to hang yourself, I guess. So he was much more like, did you mess up? And if you messed up, it was okay. And my mom was more like, follow the rules. I think inside the spirit of me is an adventurous, but when you're nurtured by the opposite of that energy, you learn to conform. And really that's what I did. I got to college and wanted just to throw all of that off and start experimenting far too much with everything, right? And like a lot of girls at that age, 21, 22, you're out, you're partying, you're having a good time. And I certainly did. And I met a boy, and a boy that changed my life. Prior to college and prior to Chad, my husband, I had one boyfriend in high school. I was that kind of girl, like steady, didn't date around a lot. So when I met Chad, like I was so hung up on this guy when I met Chad, like he kind of took that all away because he was this adventurous spirit that I was like so needed to be nurtured by. So I think we connected because I loved his spontaneity. Anybody that knows my husband would have told you, like, he was the dude that at the very last minute, let's book the trip, let's go, let's, throw a bag in the car and off we go. Like, he just had that way about him. And I just absolutely fell head over heels in love with this guy. So I got pregnant. We got married. So it was just like a rush of everything, converging at once. In fact, when I found out I was pregnant, I was graduating from college that week. And then everything just kind of came to a screeching halt. Like, oh my gosh, life is about to begin. And part of my story is that I think in the inward most parts of me, that's what I really wanted. Even though I was told, like, go to college, get a job, start a career, then start a family. Like, I was told those things, but I think inside of me, all I ever really wanted was to be a mom. And all I really ever wanted was to be loved by someone. So from there, I found myself in a marriage that I definitely was not prepared for, because the short of a real long story that I'm sure we'll dive more into is that my husband was an addict, and I did not know that, and neither did he. So I sort of fell into a very difficult relationship without really knowing it, because everything happened so fast. And then from there, like I said, we could start talking about how that carved out, but you just talk about a girl who was told this her whole life, keep it here, and now I'm in way over my head. And that's really where my story begins.
I don't think we speak enough to the whirlwind of romance and life that hits us in our early 20s. And okay, I'm from a small town, so I feel like there's so much pressure, when everyone's getting married at 21 and then they're having babies before they're 25. And then if you're not in that same situation, you feel like you're doing something wrong. I was very similar. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be married. I wanted to have this perfect family, but there's so many things happening with men and women in their 20s where they aren't sure of who they are. And they may have these underlying issues that they don't think is an issue until it becomes detrimental to their relationship.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the brain isn't even fully developed. I can only imagine what both of our families thought when we announced that we were having a baby. I mean, surely to God, they thought we were crazy, What I have learned to this point in my life is you better be careful with what you really start really identifying with what you need and want, because you will find a way to make it happen. It just, whether that be through accidental cause or be through, something intentional, you can't run away from true desire. And so that really was the true desire of my heart, was just, I didn't really care about having a career at that time. I really just wanted a family. I wanted the white picket fence and what I saw and thought my parents had,
We're going to fast forward a little bit and start from the point where you said that your father had passed. And I know just in our initial conversations that your husband passed 6 weeks after that. And so can you take us back to that season of life and just how that all unfolded for you?
Yeah. I'll give a little bit of a preface prior to my dad dying in just where Chad was in his disease. And I do know it is a disease, and it's one that didn't just affect him. It affected me. It affected our entire family, because that's what it is. It's a family disease. I also want to say, just in complete fairness, for not only my kids who might hear this, his family and everyone who loves him, there's a lot of stigma about addiction, I think, that happens in people that don't have this in their life or as a part of their story, may have some perceptions. And I will tell you that even being married in this very painful situation, watching someone drown in it, essentially, it was not what I thought, and it was not what I think anyone else would have thought. He was very loving. He was very protective. He was very loyal. The best friend you could have ever asked for in someone. Even at his worst, he was still this very charismatic, loving person. And I always want to be very truthful about representing that in the story. But that being said, he suffered from an addiction that just completely took over. I mean, all of those characteristics, though they were true, his behavior was the opposite of that many times in real life. And so at the very worst of this disease, to just lay out the facts, he was not getting up out of bed. He was sleeping all day until I would come home. And by this point, we have 3 kids. In the span of 5 years, we had 3 kids. He just really wasn't very present, because when you're in that addiction, it is a cycle of constantly having to feed it some way, somehow. And it got so big where when you can't physically function and you need a substance to do that, you find a way to make that happen, and that becomes the priority of your life. So what our day-to-day life would look like would be, me coming home from work, him just now, leaving or shortly before I got there, and staying out all night to either find a pill, take a pill, or, be around an environment that he could get more. And this was the cycle of our life. Lots of incidences, wrecks, all kinds of things that I could go into, but just that was our world. So incredibly stressful. So here we have this one side of it where, it's very active and very volatile. But my father was also, I believe, an addict in different ways. He was definitely a workaholic, I understand it because he had a family to support. And I get that not only as a man, but as a mom who views herself as a provider, as a parent. So I get all of those things. But he did make a lot of choices that took him away from his family because of that stress, caused a lot of unhealthy behavior. So smoking was definitely something that was always attached to my dad, and drinking pretty heavily. My dad, though, was very high functioning, always out of bed, always on time, always filling the need at work or filling the gap at work, to the extent that he pushed his health and, really the family members that had to take care of his health. In 2009, while all this was going on in my personal life, my mom was dealing with similar issues with my dad because of smoking and other unhealthy habits. He had esophageal cancer. By the time we found it, because of his tendencies to work and push through and ignore a lot of signs that were just in plain sight, we did not find out about that diagnosis until he was really too far gone. It was just a very difficult season for my family of origin as well as my own family. I have so much empathy for people that have cancer because it is just the most undignified way to go. We watched so many things with my dad that it's just like little pieces, little fractions of someone leaving, and you're watching it day by day. That's the continuity in both of these men in my life. So when my father passed away, Chad's, addiction didn't rest. Here, we're at his funeral. Chad is acting very bizarre. I do start getting asked questions that I am not comfortable in answering. And it was finally kind of the tipping point for me. Prior to that, I had even contemplated divorce, even while my dad was still alive. In fact, when my dad was still alive, that one of the last conversations I had with him was about what that would look like, realistically, because again, I had 3 small kids to consider and think about. But that was really when I knew the days of my dad being available were gone, because his advice was basically, I would hate for you to see you lose your support network because blood is thicker than water. So his fear for me in his last days were, if I left this situation, that I would be left alone because he wouldn't be there. After we come back to Lubbock, I would say I wasn't even to the point where I was grieving my father's death because I was so absorbed in what was happening in my daily life. You could have blown me over with a feather when I came home and find, Chad is gone. And literally it was from one day to the next. There were no real signs. That day was not terribly different than others, other than he was very sick the weekend before. That's actually kind of a turning point in the story, I think, from a spiritual perspective. For me, this was very, in hindsight, a weekend that was very monumental in my faith journey. But Chad left a lot of things undone. But this particular weekend, he did everything he could to make amends, because somewhere in the back of his mind, I think he knew that time was running short. So here I have two completely different scenarios of death of a very, the two most influential men in my life. One that was very slow, and then the other one that just came suddenly. And it was just, what do you even do with that? Like there was no processing that. It was just utter shock. Almost like I was in the eye of a storm. And the weird part about being in an eye of a storm is there is so much commotion around you, but you are completely still. And it really was the first presence of God that I have ever felt to that degree. Even though I had no right to think anything but just chaotic mess of thoughts, my brain was very still. There was a flood of all I can describe as warmth and peace in the middle of the most confusing, hectic turmoil that I had to date had ever experienced. That moment for me and my family was just a broken road like I cannot describe. Like the Berlin Wall just comes crashing down, So you're just standing there and like, what's next? What am I going to do with this? I have a lot of deep empathy for people that just stand in the middle of a broken mess and not know what the first move is. So I think I really resonate with people that are in the middle of that experience because I know from a deep perspective what it feels like.
I just can't imagine. I can't imagine those two scenarios to begin with, but also to have 3 children as well and trying to keep life moving in those situations, but also in a way that takes care of yourself. And so I'm really happy to hear that you did feel almost that calm and that strength in your faith at that moment in time, because we see that so often where people go the opposite direction and, they question everything. They lose their faith and understandably so. But I think for you, because you're having to uplift so many different people around you and yourself, that moment for you is monumental, just because how else were you going to get through that personally?
Yeah. I really think all of those kids were there by design, because I've actually thought a lot about that moment. Why was there, because I agree, like I've seen many people go through not a similar circumstance, but something parallel and not have a faith. And there was, I can't say that it was, look, there was, I would not be honest and truthful with you if I was to sit here and say that I thought optimistically and positively throughout that. I did not. And in fact, part of the awareness that I have today is in what my part was in that family disease, because I had one, so there were many times that I only added to the pain and suffering that was in my own home. But what I did have was a very small seed of faith from the very beginning that could only have been, I think, because of my kids that were given to me, that gave me the will to see there had to be something better. There had to be more to life than just this, because I know what hopelessness feels like also. I had that moment of surrender too, of just going, okay, if this is my lot in life, then I don't, like, when you are so fixated on what to do next and how to control it and how to fix things and make them better, and you just can't, and everywhere you try to stick your hand in, something else breaks. That moment of despair, I don't know what I would have done if I had not had 3 kids to also push me forward. I don't think I was strong enough. I can tell you, the person I was before them, I don't think I was strong enough to have withstood what I lived through without them, for sure. So I think that was all by design, and I'm beyond grateful for that.
You mentioned fixing, and I am the same person. I want to fix everything. I want to feel as if I can have some sort of control over other people's reactions, my feelings. And I know that's 100% not true. And you shared with us that addiction obviously played the biggest role in your husband's death. But how has that shaped your understanding now of what love looks like and maybe just control in general?
That's such a great question, because actually from his own mouth was something that guided me after he passed. But I don't, nobody wakes up one day and says, I want to be an addict. You fall into these behaviors kind of unknowing for a lot of reasons. But one that he was able to identify was that he was always provided for. If he got in trouble, I mean, he was a little bit of a wild child, and those that know him would tell you, if he got in trouble, there was always someone to bail him out. And even, at some of the darkest moments, in conversation with his family, that was something that we would talk about. How do we make this better? How do we right this wrong? How do we go fix this? Because what other choice do you have? It seems like, but what I know about is that's not love, because, or that's not loving someone. That's trying to control the situation because it's uncomfortable for you to live in. And the hard pill to swallow about that, no pun intended for me, was that, basically every time I went in to try to rescue the situation, or his family went in to try to rescue him, or his friend, is that we were telling him, you're not capable of doing this on your own. And what a way to deflate someone's spirit. I wish that he could have been at a point where we could really have had conversations about his childhood, because he really didn't share a whole lot of that with me. Where a lot of those things came from, I'm sure there's endless stories to tell. Though he appeared very confident, I think he suffered from a lot of insecurity. And when people just kept coming to his aid, he wasn't forced to figure things out. It became a crutch. And when you need a crutch to live, it's very scary to go through life without that. So I do know, in conversations that we would have, we didn't always agree on our parenting. And that was a source of a lot of tension, even in a healthy dynamic, and in the days when the addiction wasn't so crazy and out of control. But we would get into disagreements about that, because he was very adamant that he would not be the same type of parent that he had, that he would not just come to their rescue. And I think I thought I think I fell more in line with, his family's way of raising, because I was left alone in mine. I think I thought that love was that empathy of just always being there and always showing up. I wasn't looking at it from the other perspective. So when he did pass away, something that was just a very strong urge in me was to not handicap my children our children, I should say, in that same way, and to honor him. My kids would probably tell you I maybe went a little too crazy and far the other way of trying to control in some ways that outcome with them, but I wanted them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet.
And I'm sure there's so many things that contributed to the way that you were realizing maybe some of the roles that every family member had played in this entire situation. Offline, you and I had discussed what Al-Anon is for you, because I know, some of this may have come up for you in that time. And I wasn't familiar with Al-Anon. I, unknowingly asked you if that's the same thing as Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's not. So I want to first give you an opportunity to talk about the difference between AA and Al-Anon, because I want to dive into that part of your story, since it is such a large part of your healing.
Yeah, and I love this, because growing up in church, you see a lot, and I didn't, just for the record. My family kind of went the opposite of that route, giving us a little bit more freedom to make our own decisions when it came to that. But what I saw when I actively chose to start going to church was a lot of falsehood, right? I saw a lot of the same pattern that existed in my own family. I saw a lot of covering up and a lot of making sure that everything looked prim and proper, and not really divulging like the real crap that everybody deals with. There was just a lot of facades there. Al-Anon, for those that don't know, it is similar to a 12-step program like AA or Alcoholics Anonymous, but Al-Anon is for family members that have addicts or alcoholics in their life. And so while it is similar, it is also different, because in part of what Al-Anon teaches you is that your role is that you are as addicted to that person as they are to that substance. And that was a really enlightening concept for me at the time. I found out about it. I mean, and again, I would be unfair to not say Chad and I lived this walk of recovery together multiple times. I mean, it's not like he did not try to go get help for what he was dealing with. He did. He loved his kids. He wanted to be better. He wanted to be better for me. Like, he wanted that as a family. It's just that addiction is powerful and cunning and baffling, and you can't control it, and you didn't cause it. And that is what Al-Anon and AA both fundamentally teach. I thank God that it was introduced to me while he was going through recovery programs. I had one of my own, but for whatever reason, just like it didn't stick with him each time, it didn't stick with me either. And until that last year, that was the year that I started making a choice and a commitment to really my recovery and learning what this was about, because I was suffering so deeply that I could see no other way to survive without someone who didn't look at me with like deer in the headlights, trying to understand but couldn't. But when I walked in that room, there was a comfort that, again, is just kind of a piece that I cannot explain. There were people that did not come from the same talks of life as me, completely different stories, but somehow they were sisters and brothers to me. Somehow we were united in some weird spiritual way. And I'm so grateful for that. In fact, I love to share this story because it, to me, was the first moment of just, oh my God, like I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. There was a woman, her name is Bonnie, and I love her so much. Again, just if we had seen each other on the street, we probably both would have passed each other along. Nowhere in any way or form did we come from the same place. But that girl walked in, or when I walked in, very broken, very afraid. Talk about a room that I was so scared to step into. And she embraced me like I have never been embraced by a friend, let alone a perfect stranger. I mean, she just took me under her wing. I cannot explain it. It wasn't weird. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just as if God had just literally put an angel in my path. I don't know how else to explain it. And it's funny about how you talked about, or how people say, you know, people are in your life for reasons and seasons. She was definitely a seasoned person because she was there that year and she was gone the next. I do not know where my healing journey would have even been possible without that moment, walking into that room. And honestly, like, Chad is the one that led me there, you know? So I'm grateful for that too.
Are they classes, or is it an entire program? Does it have a length of time or a duration?
Yeah, it's a group, and there are many different groups and many chapters here. I think there's 3 currently that are still functioning, but its goal is just to provide a space where you can talk, or you can talk and share, or you cannot. You can just sit and listen. But it's a place that reminds us that we are in control of nothing but this right here, you know, how we show up in the world, that love is not control, that in fact, by trying to control the situation, we often make matters worse. I do have to say, like, for a matter of months, I just sat in that room and said absolutely nothing. And I can remember in those first few months, just again, being so intimidated, not wanting to share a single word, because again, when you're living through something like this, denial is so powerful. You learn to cover up everything because you don't want people to see you. So being even in a room where you should seemingly feel able to be vulnerable, it's still so challenging as a newcomer walking in there and getting ready to unload all of this for various reasons, you know, not wanting to be a burden, or feeling like, you know, maybe this isn't for you, or your situation isn't as bad, or a lot of different reasons and stories that you can tell yourself to not come, which is what I did. You know, I almost gaslit myself a lot of times, just not being ready. I just wasn't ready. But when I finally, you know, kind of came to a point where I had to, just everything that I took in was just a little piece of sanity coming back to me, because that is the definition of alcoholism. It is doing the same thing over. It's insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. And that was not happening in my home. So these slogans like stop and think, or don't, stop thinking and don't react, live and let live. Like those are things that just stood out to me, because when I would come home from that meeting and open the door, I didn't know what I was walking back into. I didn't know if he would be there. I didn't know if there would be things in my house that my kids could get a hold of, like pills or what. I didn't know what to expect. And so my home life was very unsafe. But in that room, I was reminded that no matter what that environment that I'm coming back to looks like, I'm in control of me, and how I show up matters. And it just really, it started changing how I walked, and like how I was going to live the rest of this out. So when, going back to that spiritual weekend and him maybe knowing that this was happening, I don't find it any coincidence that by that point it was my 1 year anniversary in Al-Anon. I had been there 1 year, and he actually acknowledged that. I remember at 1 year you get to share your story. And by that point, this had become a family to me. And I was going to have that moment to be able to kind of stand up and say, like, I made it a year, and I'm so grateful for all of you and just what I've absorbed. And again, I don't know where he was on his own recovery journey, but I do know he acknowledged mine, and he sent me flowers the day of that. So, and in that same weekend, and then in the next breath, he's gone. So I can't say enough about Al-Anon and what it did for me in healing.
And I want to give you an opportunity at the end to really talk more about the resources that are available for people, in our local area as well. But before we do all that, were you still participating in Al-Anon even after the passing of your husband, or was that something that was more kind of in the moment for you and your family?
I mean, shortly after, yes. And actually, I say shortly after, for a long time after. My kids even remember going to Al-Anon with me. I had a sponsor, and so it's really just the one person, when you feel so isolated, and oftentimes I did, and you feel like you have no one to talk to, because at some point in these situations, you stop talking to your family because they're so protective of you that it's almost like they'll give you information to say, get out of this situation. Why are you still here? And so it becomes pressure. Or you have the opposite of people, encouraging you to stay because of whatever reason. And for me, there was so much clutter in my head that sponsorship became an outlet where it was the one person in my life that I could say anything to. And I needed that process, because when you just hold all of this stuff in, and we'll talk about this kind of at the end of things that I've learned from this, but energy is energy. It's never gone. It always exists in you. And so if you don't find an outlet, and when pain demands to be felt, and when you have no outlet and you have no voice, it's just living inside of you. It's like a rotting apple. It literally is like rotting you from the inside out. So sponsorship is an incredibly important and valuable experience in the whole process of the program, because it is one person, day or night, rain or shine, that you're picking up the phone. And, in that process, you learn a lot too, because you learn, life happens to everyone. Not everyone is available, even though they want to be and tell you. What are you going to do if that person can't pick up? It teaches you some self-reliance, but also in the context of a relationship that can be relied upon. So it teaches you healthy boundaries. It teaches you how to be participatory, how to have empathy for someone else. I could dive into a whole class of lessons of just that one topic alone. But that relationship was very significant to me even after Chad's passing.
I'm really glad that, that resource for you, it sounds like it took you through so many different phases of just your overall journey, because, you went there to kind of figure out how to live with the experience you were going through and what your husband was going through. And then after his passing, then it's talking about healing from that situation and that lifestyle. But then it sounds like it really took you into this path of self-discovery and personal growth as well. So I'm curious if the work that you did with Al-Anon, or if there was just a moment where your lived experience really started shaping what you do now, because I know you help so many people in different ways. But obviously you had to get comfortable with that part of yourself before you could start, providing that to others. So how do you feel like this overall experience for you has really started to shape the way that you have begun your service to others?
God, that's a great question. Here's what I will say. So this is post 2009. Looking back at that rubble, I am so fortunate to have had, I'll call it a mustard seed size of faith innately or the wherewithal to be able to say this cannot get any worse. It can only get better from here. But I'm going to have to unlearn, basically. And so the process of healing for me was a lot of unlearning. And I would say Al-Anon definitely was that first step. The next piece that kind of came into the equation or puzzle of figuring that out was that I did not have a clue as to who I was. I spent my whole life doing what other people told me to do. I can't remember the movie that it was, but I remember this dawned on me one time. Oh, yeah, dude, it's The Runaway Bride. And there's a line in that movie where she's eating eggs. And in the beginning, you see her eating eggs of all of her boyfriends, the same version of eggs that they eat. And I literally watched a mother that did that. She couldn't answer the things that she liked about herself. It was always in reference to what my dad liked, And I found myself repeating that same behavior with Chad. Where do you want to go? I don't know. What do you want? I'm still guilty of those patterns of behavior today. Or do you like this? I don't know. What do you like? Oh, yeah, I like that too. So I was just this chameleon conformist, who just constantly put on a mask and another one and another one and another one to try to please people. So I think what Al-Anon gave to me was a sense of identity, to know that my voice matters. And honestly, I can't say enough about what that room teaches you about showing up and speaking for yourself, because you will hear things that you disagree with. But to be able to sit in a room and love that person anyway, and be able to disagree because you have a commonality, but still be able to speak your piece about it as well, and you get a chance to do that, it's invaluable practice. And I think we can all take a lesson from that in the state of affairs today. I started really understanding that I needed to know way more about me. So where that next piece led for me was a mentor that my first personal development class and book, which was John Maxwell's 15 irrefutable, I'm going to mess it up, 15 irrefutable ways to growth, something like that. I probably messed up the title, but John Maxwell is the author. He talks about the law of pain, and that the law of pain is the environment that gives us a chance to grow. And so I thought, okay, that really resonated with me, because again, that kind of that inward knowing piece in me that was already saying there had to be something better, but to know that this pain was going to be the path that showed me that, it gave me the curiosity I needed, I guess, to start, uncovering what does that look like? Who am I? What kind of eggs do I like? And why does that matter? So, from there, I came across, which there's lots of versions of this. So I'm trained in one, but there are many. Myers-Briggs, DISC is the one that I'm trained on. The Enneagram, if those people that have taken those and know their numbers are out there. All of those are wonderful tools to give you some intel about the way that you behave, the way that you communicate, the way that you reflect your values, to even begin to know what your values are and what's important to you. So I would say to anyone, including myself, if I had to give my younger self that same piece of advice, that was the first great place for me to start learning about me.
There's so many different tools out there, but I'm definitely an Enneagram girl. And I know you actually came and presented to one of our groups through Junior League. We were mentoring young girls, and you came and did your DISC presentation. And so I really, really love that you do this work, because I do think it's so important for us to know what our motivations are and why we are the way that we are. And maybe not using it as an excuse, but using it as an identifier to also help us grow personally, to say, okay, I have a tendency to do this. I have a tendency to treat people this way. And here's how I can improve upon that or use it to my advantage. Or maybe this is how I need to use it to truly understand other people and their reactions and their personality traits. So I love, love, love that you're doing that work.
Yeah. And that part, I think, to me is so important to this day is, yes, it has been a wonderful tool for me to explain myself, things that I had no explanation for prior to, but even more useful, it is the part of seeing a pattern in someone else and being able to recognize it, because I think that's what empathy really is, is being able to step outside of your own ways and preferences of doing things and being able to meet people where they're at, and I'm grateful that tool has been able to help me uncover some of those patterns in people so that I can show up a little better for them.
For sure. You did mention something about identity and really helping people kind of release the identity of who they thought they were going to be. And I'm curious, how in your work do you help people let go of that thought of who it is that they think they should be or who they thought they would be, and how it encourages them to discover their true self, in a sense?
Yeah. I'm going to answer that in the same way that question was kind of presented to me, in a couple of different scenarios. One, and forgive me because I do not remember the name of the TED Talk speaker that gave this first analogy, but the image was what came across to me first. It's an image of this, it essentially looks like a huge wall calendar with an inch worth of tiles all across this whole big calendar. And for every inch, it is a year of an average 80-year-old life. So when you look at those inches, the ones that you've checked off to date versus the ones that you have left, it's very profound, especially when you get, when there's more inches behind you than there are in front of you. It's a very profound visual to remember that every day matters. And again, on top of that, I had two very loving reminders that your health matters, your peace of mind matters, and that not every day is promised. I had a very painful reminder of that. The second analogy actually came from Dr. Phil, love him or hate him, but I thought this was so crazy because it was the same kind of concept, except for me, way more powerful. He did the same thing. He took a ladder. Then he was speaking with this woman, and he took a ladder and he marked for every peg of the ladder was a decade or maybe a year of her life. Maybe he broke it out in years. Same thing. She was at the time, I was younger, but at the time she's my age now. So I'll be turning 47 later in the month. And she was looking at the road ahead of her versus the past. You could just see the look of her on her face of like, if you're actually standing there and just think about where I am to date, and let's just say my average life, there's 30 more summers, 30 more winters, 30 more springs, 30 more falls. That just doesn't sound like as much time as I want, right? So how am I going to make the most of that time? So when people are standing in the front of that transition, that is often an exercise that I go through with them to just go, what do the rest of these marks consist of? What do you want them to consist of? And start getting them to dream again. Because I think for me, that was something that I just pushed to the back burner because I was living in this pragmatic, survival mode all the time instead of really assessing, what matters to me and what I want my life to represent.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful visualization. I had that moment for myself in the last couple of years, and it really is something that is life-changing because you think, this is probably what I should do. This is what I'm expected to do. This is who I'm expected to be and who I've been in the last few years, or, for some, the majority of my adult life. But is this really the way that I want to live my life? And when you stop and think about that, it's just so transformational when there's even a little tiny voice inside of you that says, I don't think this is it. I don't think this is who I am. And just like we talked about in the beginning of us being like ambiverts, where it's like, I want to be this outspoken, confident person, but on the inside, it's okay to admit that I want to be at home in my pajamas and drinking a glass of wine instead of being out in the masses. But yeah, I love that you're doing that. I love that you're really helping people discover that like pivotal point in their life. And I can only imagine how rewarding it is for you to be able to see that truly happening within people. And the fact that you have your own very painful and transformational experience to drive that work.
I hope so. I mean, again, if nothing more, I hope that one day my kids see that. I just want to shorten the curve, you know? I want them to not spend as many years as I did, you know, now having to look back going, gosh, if I had only paid attention to that small, still voice. I think that's definitely something that I see as a pattern in people when they're kind of looking at that, is they ignore, there's a lot of mental ping pong going on. You know, they ignore that still small voice. I know I still do a lot of like, oh, you know, learning to pay attention to your gut. And there's always a logical, and I believe in that. I'm married to someone today who thinks very pragmatically and very logically, but I don't think that you can deny that voice, because to me, I think it's the voice of something greater, a power bigger than yourself, you know, greater than yourself, trying to prompt you. But again, look at how, in my belief and in my faith, how he loves us. He doesn't force his will on us. He makes us decide. So paying attention and being in tune with that voice, it's not an assurance that you can't do the opposite. You can, but I believe you're going to see the fruit of either choice. You know, you're either going to see yourself blossom in ways that you did not know were possible, or you're going to stick with the same protocol and keep trudging down this road that you hate. And if you're standing at this line and you're looking at those 30 years, do you want to keep walking a path that is uninspiring to you? Or do you want to take, you know, a slight risk in the possibility that something could be greater than you ever knew?
Oh, I love that so much. I feel like we could just sit here and talk for hours about several different topics, which really just means I need to hire you as a coach, basically.
Or just have coffee with a friend. That too.
I love that. I love that too. I want to ask you, you have so much to be proud of. And I know you know that. And I know the people around you, I'm sure I hope tell you that all the time. I'm always curious what you internally are most proud of, not just in your work and your transformation, but within yourself. What are you most proud of?
That's a big question. I am most proud of the mindset work that I'm able to recognize. I think if 10 years of personal development study has taught me nothing else, it's really 3 simple things. It is state, story, and strategy. And most people begin with the strategy. They ask themselves, when you're standing at the brink of a transformation, they're asking themselves, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to do this? How is this going to work out? They're, again, kind of playing that mental ping pong. And I know I spent the majority of my time in that space in my own head. Tony Robbins is actually the one that is attributed to saying this, but he said you need to flip-flop that. You need to start with your state first, and then your story, and then your strategy, because your state is, again, kind of going back to this whole precipice of energy is not, you know, it never ceases to exist. It always exists, but it does transform and takes different shape. You know, again, I have a personal testimony of watching energy take shape destructively or in a healthy way. And so I think the thing that I'm the most proud of today is understanding how to do that. In fact, that's kind of the thesis of what my book will be about, is really my personal experience and uncovering the way or the path to figure out how to transform my state, and by asking myself, what is this energy and what am I going to do with it? Because until I can change that, I'm going to continue to squirrel in my head all of these stories that for me come from a long, you know, childhood of lack, thinking that I can't or that I'm deficient somehow. So if I can change my story, change my state, I tell myself better stories. And then I'm able to have the confidence, because it's not like, being brave or being courageous means you're unafraid, because that is not the truth. I mean, you and I were talking before that. It's like, how do you show up and you talk? I'm scared, whatless every time I do. And most people are. But again, learning that pattern and shifting that narrative or reversing that narrative has been the thing that has unlocked so many different paths for me. And I know if it can happen for me, I believe with all of my heart that it can happen for anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important piece of advice, I think, when you're dealing with anything in life, any setback, any challenge. And so you definitely have so much to be proud of, but I love that you're proud of yourself. So, okay, Kimberly, well, I am so curious to hear the answers to the closing questions I ask every guest. My first question is, what is one thing that most people may not know about you other than what we've talked about today?
I am wildly creative. I think people know that about me, but mine is almost like it's so a part of me. This has been just kind of a recent revelation, but I love music. So I was in voice and singing, and I did that for a number of years, but piano lessons was something I always struggled with, mostly because I just, as a young person, was not disciplined enough to want to practice. And I just kind of thought, I just kind of blew it off, like thinking it didn't matter. What is so interesting is that this particular season of my life, I have needed more creativity than normal. I've always needed some element, whether that's like little crafts with the kids' school, or I love making like charcuterie boards. My girls all know that. That part has always been there. But this music piece in me that really I think I have suppressed for a very long period of time is just coming back with a vengeance, I guess. So I'm relearning the piano and kind of in the process of doing that. And it's just been a joy. I can't describe it any other way. It's like I have no plans on using it. I have no plans of anybody else seeing it, but it's just for me. So that's probably something people don't know.
I think we all have creative sides to us, and really more as a release, like you said, it's therapeutic and it's enjoyable, and it allows us to spend time with ourselves. And so even if you can't sing or you can't draw or you can't dance, I think it shouldn't stop you. So yes. I love that you're really diving into that for yourself.
Yeah, me too. It's been fun.
Okay, next question is, who are 3 women who inspire you?
Oh my gosh, I have so many women that I could say. My mom, I'm going to say first, inspires me in my creativity. Man, there is nothing she cannot figure out. I think I always kind of thought that the entrepreneurial side of me came through my dad, but really it took me getting older to see that it was really from my mom. So I would say my mom as a personal, up close and personal person. Other mentors, I have to say Molly Davis. If you don't know Molly Davis of Molly Davis Yoga here in town, she is, I can't even say enough about who Molly is. We are literally the same person 20 years apart. She is so empathetic and so nurturing and so present with everyone she meets. You cannot not love her. But then on top of that, has so much wisdom to offer and is a true example to look toward. I'm so grateful for her friendship, to have someone who is 20 years my senior to look to from that perspective, but also in the way that she takes care of herself. You would never know that she is 20 years older than me. She's just in amazing health, and I am very inspired by the way that she lives her life. So her. And then from afar, because I think we have mentors, up close, but we also have ones that now, because of technology and just like we're having conversation, podcasts and whatnot, I think Mel Robbins is probably the person from a public standpoint that really inspires me the most. I love her authenticity. I think the way that she shows up and is so vulnerable about the things that she has walked through, everything from bankruptcy and financial ruin to personal issues in her marriage and her family and as a parent. I love what she gives to the world in her most recent book, The Lethem Theory. It's so interesting to me because kind of going back to Al-Anon, like it is the thesis of Al-Anon is let them live and give them the dignity to make their own choices. And so I think she's a very powerful modern day icon of that in motion.
Absolutely. What a great list of women. I love that. Well, Kimberly, I am again so grateful for you coming on, sharing your story with me and thousands of other listeners. And I know we just scratched the surface, but I do want to save a lot of that for your book because you mentioned that you are writing your story. And so hopefully we will get to know the details or at least a more personal insight into your experience. So thank you again for everything, for sharing and just for trusting me and this platform with your story.
Thanks, Kayla. Well, you're very easy to show up and share a conversation with. So I love the Nourisher. I love what you're doing and what you're inspiring and how you show up for people. You can see it all over your presence. So thank you.
So I want to give you an opportunity to tell people where to follow along with you or your work. If you have social media, where can we learn more about Kimberly and your business as well?
Yeah, so the business is easy, just igniteconsulting.biz. I'm on Instagram and Facebook under that same name. As far as personally, I hang out on Instagram probably the most. KBG 2013, I think, is my personal profile. So if anybody wants to go follow that, it's fun. I've got, this beautiful blended family, 5 grown kids, like literally they're all adults now, which is so wild, but we love to travel. So anyway, I welcome new friendships, new relationships, and open doors. So that's where I'm hanging out.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode with Kimberly Griggs. I am incredibly grateful to Kimberly for trusting this space with her story and her experience. And thanks again to all of our anniversary sponsors for supporting the Nourisher Podcast and this community. If this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need it. And as always, thank you for being here and showing up week after week. Until next time, stay strong, stay connected, and keep growing.